We've all experienced mom guilt at some point in our motherhood journeys. It's that nagging feeling of I'm a bad mom because of something I did, or I'm not good enough because of XYZ. The feelings that come along with these thoughts feel so valid. They feel so true to reality. And yet, mom guilt really does keep us stuck in a pattern of never feeling like we're good enough, which helps no one. So today, we're looking at the question, does mom guilt ever serve us? Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Happy 2025. I know at this point we are a ways into the new year. However, it is the first solo episode of the year, and so it is worth just saying, welcome to this fresh start. I hope that your January has been going well and that you're feeling refreshed with the energy of the new year. I want to take a short moment just to thank you for being here, to thank you for continuing to tune in to Worthy Mother Podcast. If you have not already left a rating and review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, I would really appreciate it if you would take the moment before continuing to do so, and we will get on with the episode. So today I am asking and answering the question, does mom guilt ever serve us? Because mom guilt is something that so many of us, or most of us, maybe even all of us, feel on a somewhat regular basis, right? We may have tools to kind of help address those feelings of mom guilt, but it's something that can be quite pervasive in living our lives in this modern society that we live in, with all the messages we get about how we should be mothering, how we should be acting as a mother, how we should live our lives in this role of mom. And with that, there then is the idea that this is something that we can overcome. We can learn to change the thoughts that we're having and change then the feelings that we're having in reaction to those thoughts because we're thinking something different about our experience and how we're showing up. So I've talked on the podcast before about overcoming mom guilt and overcoming those thoughts and feelings that can be really intrusive in the way that we experience motherhood and life as a mom. And I have attached a resource in the show notes of this episode with 6 steps to help you overcome mom guilt, because it is something that we do want to overcome if it is getting in the way of our life, right? But the question is, does mom guilt ever actually serve us? Is it ever a good thing? Maybe something we don't want to overcome? And that's what I want to kind of get into today. So to start off, I want to really look at what it means when we experience mom guilt. What is mom guilt? What are we even talking about? Because the term mom guilt is kind of a little bit of a misnomer. Mom guilt, and the way that I talk about mom guilt, is actually more of a combination of guilt and shame. It's not actually just the experience of guilt, feeling guilty about something. It really is feeling guilty about something and then the shame that can come from that experience. And I want to just break that down for a moment. Guilt is feeling badly about something that happened, about a specific behavior. Maybe something happened and you have the sense of, I did something wrong, or this didn't go the way that I wanted. And there is a sense of guilt that comes along with that. Shame takes things a step further. Shame is really about making that mean something about yourself. It really gets into the self-worth issue. It's saying, I did something wrong and I am a bad mom. I dropped a ball here and I am not enough, right? It's really kind of taking the idea of something that happened, an external behavior, and the guilt that we may feel from that, and making it mean something internal about us as a person, about us as a mom. And that is the experience of mom guilt that I'm talking about. It's not just the guilt, it's also the shame. And the reason that we use the term mom guilt rather than mom shame is that when we're talking about mom shaming, that's something different. It can definitely have a lot to do with mom guilt. It can definitely lead to mom guilt, but mom shame and mom shaming is more like talking about the experience of somebody shaming a mom for doing something, making them feel badly about themselves for doing XYZ or not following a certain protocol or whatever it is, right? Like there's so many messages we get about the way you should do motherhood, that experience of being shamed by others, being judged by others for not doing things exactly the way that some person or group says we should. You know, if you're letting your kid have too much screen time and then you're getting shamed for it, or if you are formula feeding versus breastfeeding and there's somebody out there who is shaming you for it, that is mom shaming. Mom guilt then is the feeling that you have possibly about those things. If you make it mean something about you, like I feel bad that I'm letting my kid have too much screen time and I am a bad mom because of that, right? So that's why we use the term mom guilt versus mom shame. But mom guilt really does encompass the guilt and importantly, the shame piece. So when we're overcoming mom guilt and we're overcoming this experience about feeling badly about ourselves because of something we perceived that we've done and that makes us a bad mom or not enough, we're talking about overcoming the guilt and the shame aspect of that. I do want to insert a little caveat in this conversation because I know there are a lot of feelings about the term mom guilt and why is this something that we have to attach the word mom to? It's just the experience of guilt and shame. What does it have to do with being a mom? Why do we have to make it so kind of separate? And I feel strongly that it's important that we use the terminology mom guilt because this is the experience that is specific to moms based on societal and cultural messages to moms specifically. So moms are kind of targeted in that messaging. And so the resulting experience of mom guilt is specific to moms. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about feeling guilt and shame around something to do with work that has nothing to do with being a mom. We're talking specifically about the areas of guilt and shame where we feel not good enough as a mom, where we feel like we're a bad mom because of something. And so that language is important. And I know that there's lots of feelings about it. I understand because I think a lot of times when we're singling out moms and the experience, it can feel a little bit icky and feel a little bit weird. But I do think it's so important that we do talk specifically about the experiences that mothers face when we're addressing these things. So then we have to ask ourselves, is guilt always bad? And is shame always bad? Is the experience of guilt or the experience of shame always a bad thing? And if you really stop to think about this, think about people who have a lack of remorse, a lack of guilt for things that they may be, quote, guilty of. That's not typically thought of as a good thing. Maybe it makes life a little easier. I don't know. But it's not really a good thing. We think about criminals on trial who've done something bad, and if they're unable to show guilt, unable to show remorse, like that usually represents a disconnect in their ability to feel normal human emotions. And we see that as being something wrong with them, right? Like we should have the capability to feel guilt. If we do something that is not in line with our own values, we probably want to feel guilty about that, right? We want others to feel remorseful when they do something that hurts us, right? If they don't feel bad about it, then well, do they care? Do they just not care, right? I kind of think of guilt and apathy as opposites. And if you feel apathetic to something that you've done that actually you wouldn't want to do in the first place, like there's a disconnect there, right? So I'm going to get a little bit more into that. But before we do, I do want to talk about shame. Is there a purpose of shame? Is shame something that is ever a good thing to feel? And I think this conversation is a bit more nuanced than talking about if guilt is something that is good to feel or something we want to be able to feel. And that is because shame means something about our self-worth. And I would argue that we want to avoid experiences where we feel questionable in our self-worth because, as I say all the time, like your worth is inherent. You don't earn or lose worth because of something you did wrong or, not showing up in the quote best way. So feeling shame about something is not necessarily something we want to have happen. However, shame serves a really important purpose. It kind of allows us to not just do things for our own benefit all of the time, right? If you don't feel shame about anything, then you don't really care what others think. And while, yes, we don't want to care what others think in a lot of ways, we also don't want to be acting from a completely self-serving place 100% of the time, right? Like it makes sense that we're going to feel shameful if we do something that is truly not in line with our own values and how we want to be showing up in the world. Like it makes sense that that shame's there. And we're not trying to like get rid of that shame. I actually did an episode in 2024 with Kira Wackett, a really incredible therapist who talks a lot about shame resilience. And we talk a lot about the purpose of shame in belonging, the sense of belonging and feeling like you need to belong to a community, you need to belong in this world. That is one of the needs that we have as humans. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all need to fit in, we all need to belong. And shame does serve a function in allowing us to maintain the existence, really, that allows us to belong, right? So, yes, often it's taken way too far, but it does serve this function. And we're not trying to completely do away with shame. It's just acknowledging that shame can often control us. And when we think about mom guilt and the shame that comes along with that, it can often control us and not actually reflect what we actually want. So that's where we're going next. How do we understand if the mom guilt is actually serving us or if it's coming from a place that is not actually in line with what we value, what we believe? So, with this, it's helpful to think of the purpose of mom guilt as something to guide our behaviors and the way that we show up in line with some set of values. So, when we do something outside of that set of values, we may feel mom guilt. It's that guilt and shame. Simple enough. But here's the thing, it depends on whose values we are holding ourselves to. That determines whether that mom guilt serves us or not. And very often, the values that we are holding ourselves to are not our own. What do I mean by this? Let's look at a time when the values may be your own and you may feel mom guilt and it may actually serve you and be beneficial in some way. Let's say you are with your child and they do something that triggers you and you have a snapback reaction. You react to them in a way that is not the way that you would like to react. It's not in line with your values, how you want to parent your child. They feel badly because you just yelled at them, whatever it is, right? Like this happens to all of us. This is something for me that I personally am working on and have been working on for a long time is managing those reactions when I'm triggered. You may really, really value not reacting in that way. Whatever the parenting philosophy is that you have, no matter what it is that you want to do in that situation, this does not align with it. And so the guilt that you feel, the shame that you may feel from that, may then get you to a place to want to change that behavior, to want to heal that trigger, whatever it is. Apathy to the situation is not going to do that. Again, if we think of apathy as the opposite of the guilt and shame, that apathy to the situation, like, I don't even care that I reacted that way, which might be how you feel sometimes, that's not going to motivate you to change, to heal, to do whatever it is that needs to happen to have that not be the result next time. So when we can think of it like that, we can understand then that yeah, the mom guilt may actually serve us in that situation, right? If we think about then how it can reflect on our self-worth, yes, there's an argument to be made that like it's not helpful for us to feel shame about that. So we can process the shame and we can develop shame resilience and kind of get through that. But the guilt and shame do help motivate us to make the change that allows us to be more in line with our values. But a lot of times when we feel mom guilt based on something we've done or something that's happened, the value behind that does not actually belong to us as an individual. So, what I mean by this is that often we feel badly about something that happens and make it mean that we believe we are a bad mom or we believe we are not good enough. And the value behind that is not ours to begin with. It's not something that we actually think is important and think actually matters in our motherhood, in our mothering. So, for example, if you let your kid watch, quote, too much TV, but you actually deep down don't think that letting your kid watch TV when you're working, because that's the only solution you have, maybe daycare's closed or they're home with you because of financial reasons or whatever it is, like that actually does not reflect on you as a bad mom. Deep down, you understand that there are other things happening in the world that make that the appropriate decision in that moment. It doesn't actually reflect on you being a bad mom, even if you would prefer they don't watch so much TV. But the value there of my kids shouldn't be watching TV and they are, so I'm a bad mom, that belief, if you really get into it, may not actually be your belief. We can even do this for the example of having a reaction to your child that you don't like. There may be that sense of mom guilt and feeling like I did something wrong. I need to change myself for that. But also at times, it may be, wait. I don't actually believe that having a negative reaction every once in a while to this makes me a bad mom because I'm human. And as a human, I'm not going to react perfectly to everything. And yeah, maybe I want to change things for myself. I want to heal this, but it doesn't make me a bad mom. There are so many examples of how we can feel mom guilt about things that we don't actually truly believe in our value system make us a bad mom. The breastfeeding versus formula feeding thing is a huge one. So my youngest is now almost 4, which is wild to say. But with both of my kids, I breastfed and I was able to breastfeed them both until they weaned before they were 2. My first child, I had a really hard start to breastfeeding, and my second child, it was honestly pretty easy. I was really lucky that it was an easy experience for me. I have always held a very, very, very deep belief that regardless of how somebody feeds their baby, if their baby is being fed, whether that's as a breastfed or chest fed baby or with formula, like you do you. There doesn't have to be a quote good reason to switch to formula. I know for some moms, it's like they literally can't breastfeed. But I know for me, with my first dealing with a hard time breastfeeding, there were definitely times where I reflected and said, I probably should have stopped. I'm glad I didn't. It got easier, but like I was really struggling with my mental health because of feeding problems we were having. And had we switched to formula, I probably wouldn't have dealt with those same issues, right? Like, there are so many reasons why someone might not breastfeed and actually make the choice. Even if they could breastfeed, they may make the choice to not breastfeed because they're going back to work or it's really painful or like whatever the reason is. There's so many reasons deeply in my core. I believe that whatever choice you make, you and your family make, that is best for you based on whatever factors is great. Like, as long as the baby's being fed, fed is best, right? Like, all those things. When my youngest was like 10 months old, he was already eating foods. I decided that we would introduce formula so that if I kind of failed at bringing the milk home from work that I pumped, which happened a few times, just left it at work sitting out and then it was bad and we didn't have a huge like backup. It was like, well, why not just introduce formula? This was right before the formula shortage. Why not just introduce formula so that if we need it, we have it. We have a can of formula that we can use if we don't have milk for him. There was this bizarre experience I had of feeling guilty giving my child formula, even though I very much believe that no matter how you feed your baby is great. But also, I was breastfeeding. My baby was already eating food, so it's not like he was just having breast milk. He was having all kinds of other things, right? Like all kinds of other things. And this is my second child, so it's we weren't as like careful about what we were feeding him in a way, right? And I still had this like, it was bizarre. It really caught me off guard to have these feelings of guilt around that. Like, what is going on? I can logic my way out of this, but I still feel it underneath. And that was one of those moments where I really had to look at the thoughts I was having. Like, what thought is underlying this feeling that I'm having? And what value is attached to it, because it sure as hell is not my value. It sure as hell is not what I believe. And it really was that those really pervasive messages that we get from all kinds of places about kind of like villainizing formula had kind of infiltrated my underlying belief system. They weren't my values, but the messages were there. And without consciously going in and being like, whoa, 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 that value, that belief does not actually belong to me, like shove it to the side. I was having these thoughts and feelings come up that were really, really not serving me and really, really not aligned with what I actually believe. And we see this happen so often with so many things, right? We see it with not having a perfectly put together house and the guilt and shame that can come with that of like, I'm a bad mom because I can't manage my house perfectly. We see it with feeding your kids when it's like, I'm a bad mom because I gave my kids mac and cheese last night and chicken nuggets tonight, and I'm not doing enough. Okay, look further at that. Do you believe that the only way to be a good mom is to serve beautiful home cooked meals that are perfectly well balanced? Do you? Is that the only way to be a good mom? If not, that belief, the value behind that feeling of mom guilt, actually doesn't belong to you. The thoughts you're having about that are leading to those feelings actually aren't really warranted in your own values and belief system. Maybe it's a goal of yours to work towards something different, but the mom guilt behind it is not serving you. Making it feel like you're a bad mom because of that does not serve you. When our kids are having a hard time in school or sports or with friends, and we make that mean something about us because we're not doing enough for them, because we're not doing the right things to help them get better grades or maintain better relationships. When you look at the values behind the mom guilt that's happening, do you believe that your child has to get the best grades for you to be considered a good mom? Do you? If you don't, that's not your value. That value belongs to society and to culture. And we are constantly taking in these messages about the values that we, quote, should hold. We are constantly taking in these messages about what it does mean to be a good mom. So we can't feel badly about that. We can't feel badly about having the mom guilt and having that not be completely aligned with our values. Like it's going to happen, it's inevitable. But when we can understand what it is that's happening and how those kinds of experiences that we might be having based on the societal messages and the values that those bring to us that don't actually belong to us, we can then start to understand where we want to start overcoming these feelings of mom guilt, to start kind of moving past things and reframing thoughts so that we don't feel constant guilt and shame about everything we do that feels like it's not what we're supposed to be doing. When it comes down to it, mom guilt, the experience of mom guilt is meant to control us. It's meant to keep us doing things the way that society and culture want us to be doing things. And that is a whole other conversation. We are mothering within a patriarchal system. There are a lot of factors to that, and it's not what we're going to get into too much in this episode. But when we feel mom guilt that is not aligned with what we truly value, and oftentimes it's not, when we are actually feeling that deep shame, it's actually not tied to things that we actually value, that we actually believe. We are, in a sense, kind of giving into this patriarchal system, which, again, there's no reason to feel shame about that. It's just what happens. It's what will happen unless we bring awareness to this and intentionally reframe. But it's just important to acknowledge that there is a sense of control that comes with us feeling shame about these things, about us feeling like we're not enough, like we're bad moms when we don't live up to standards of perfection that we will never live up to. With that, I want to leave you with a resource. Again, linked in the show notes, I have the 6 steps to overcome mom guilt. It's a guide that will walk you through 6 steps again to reframe your thoughts and adjust your feelings that can then lead to better outcomes where you're not feeling stuck in cycles of mom guilt. So, any time you feel mom guilt and it is attached to a societal belief that is not yours to begin with, you can use this framework. The more you practice it, the more kind of natural it gets. For me, this is something that if I feel those feelings of feeling guilt and shame about something I've done and I make it mean something about me as a mom, I just automatically tend to go into this idea of like, what's happening? What thought am I having that's made me feel this way? Wait, that's not actually what I believe. And it just naturally changes. So the more you can practice this, the better. Go ahead and download that guide if you want to start making the changes in your life to overcome mom guilt. Because typically, when we're feeling badly about ourselves enough to where we're thinking we're a bad mom because of something, or we're thinking we're not enough because of something, we're making it mean something about our self-worth, there's that shame aspect. Typically, it's not serving us. And so we want to then work to overcome that, right? What can I do to change those thoughts and feelings so that I can live life without feeling so weighed down by the guilt and shame? Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am so excited to keep having these conversations with you in the new year. I will see you next week. You are worthy, Mama.